Hello, America and the world. This is Radio Free Market. I am your guest host, Patrick Barron. We are behind the lines of socialism, my friends, and Radio Free Market is the voice of free people and free markets. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Walter Block of Loyola University in New Orleans. Hello, Walter.
Hello, good to be with you.
Thank you for being with us. Dr. Block, let me just give you a little background on Dr. Block. He is the Harold E. Worth Eminent Scholar and holds the endowed chair for that person and is professor of economics at Loyola University in New Orleans. I've known and have met Dr. Block on a couple occasions at Mises Institute conferences, and have been reading him for years and listening to his podcast for years. So, Walter, thank you very much for being with us. This is quite a pleasure. Walter has a new book out, and the book is titled Ron Paul for President in 2012, Yes to Ron Paul and Liberty. My first question, Dr. Block, is this an authorized book by Dr. Paul, or is this sort of on your own? You're representing Dr. Paul's positions on things.
Well, I don't know how to answer that exactly. It's not authorized in the sense that he asked me to do it or I asked him for permission, but he did give me a blurb for the back of the book, and I'll read you the blurb. It says, Walter Block is one of the top writers and scholars in the liberty movement. It is an honor to have Walter as a friend and supporter. So I don't know if it's authorized, but it's certainly supported by Ron Paul.
Oh, very good. Well, we'll just tell the folks how can they buy this book, first of all, because that's one thing. We do want them to go out and get this book for themselves after they listen to your discussion of it.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. It's available on Amazon. Go to Amazon.com, and it's also available on Kindle. Amazon's around $25. Kindle, it's a lot cheaper.
Okay. Well, actually, I am on the Amazon.com site, and when I can tell the listeners that when you click on the book, it says "Look Inside." It has a very nice table of contents, and tell you everything that's in here. So, what this book is, it is a series of essays, which is something that I like when I read a book of this type, because I don't have to necessarily read the whole book. I can quickly find the parts that pertain to me. So,
how dare you say you don't have to read the whole book? I'm kidding.
Well, there are some topics that after a while you think, well, I know Dr. Paul's position on that, but then there were some in here that I find, I saw, well, this is very interesting. I'm going to have to get this book and read more about it. One of them is it was the 7 rules for media interviews. Ron Paul has had to suffer through some very difficult, hostile interviews, has he not? And what are some of his rules for how to cope with that?
My God, that's a vicious question. I don't remember them all. What page is this on? I've got the table of contents on in front of me, but it's a 400-page book, so I don't remember exactly what I said there.
Chapter 15. I'm sorry, Walter. Chapter 15 says 7 rules for media interviews. What to do about Chris Matthews. So.
Right. Well, Ron has been viciously attacked and ignored, and when he gets interviewed, people don't let him speak. They continually interrupt him. They make fun of him. And what I did in this chapter is I mentioned 7 possibilities, and now that I've got it in front of me, I can remember what I said. And what I'm doing here is not so much saying what he should do, but I'm exploring the possibilities. So the first one is talk faster. If you talk really fast, then it's hard for them to interrupt, like I just talked fast. But I don't really think that that's a good one, because you lose your presence, as I say. You want people to be able to hear you, and if you speak, in some of those advertisements for insurance or whatever, you have these announcers that speak like 1,000,000 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Really, that you don't understand it. It's just to satisfy the government. Well, I don't really think that's good, but I do mention it because I want to be exhaustive in my possibilities. Another one is to talk more slowly. And this would be sort of passive-aggressive, almost inviting the interviewer to interrupt you, like I'm now speaking much more slowly. I once tried this myself. I was interviewed by Dave Barrett, who is a former, what do you call it in Canada, the head of the province of British Columbia, premier of British Columbia. And I spoke very slowly, and he continually interrupted me so badly that the producer of the show apologized to me and invited me back on the show, and Dave Barrett sort of had to apologize to me. So that's another possibility. The third one is to keep talking. Don't allow yourself to be interrupted. Even if they keep interrupting you, just keep talking, whether slow or fast, but don't budge. And you can even say nonsense syllables like abba-dabba-doo or something like that, just to override him. And the idea here is this will sort of embarrass him because he's a professional and he's interviewing you on radio or TV. And if there are two voices continually heard and the listeners can't hear anyone, maybe he'll shut up. The fifth one is to change the subject. If he asks you about something you're not interested in, just say, well, you could say, no sooner do I get 5 words out of my mouth that you interrupt me, so let's talk instead about your compulsive need to hog the limelight. I'm now quoting from myself. Sounds pretty good.
I like that.
Another one is to counter-interrupt. As soon as he starts speaking, you interrupt him. Show him how it feels to be interrupted. Then the Ron Paul one, I said, let me quote here. This is on page 156. Be a gentleman. Do exactly as Ron Paul did. Do not counter-interrupt. Allow yourself to be continually interrupted. Don't speed up or slow down your normal rate of speaking. Do not give the interviewer a lecture on good manners. Which is best? I'm not sure. I welcome discussion on this point. In other words, what I'm trying to do in this chapter is not give advice to Ron Paul, but sort of lay out the possibilities. As here's the waterfront as I see it. Here are 7 possibilities. Let's now discuss this and see if we can all put our heads together and come up with something better for Ron Paul. But I think the point is that he is treated viciously by interviewers. Chris Matthews is just the tip of the iceberg. So that's pretty much what this chapter says, and thanks for telling me what page it's on, because, in all honesty, I forgot exactly what I said here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that, Walter. I'll try not to do it again.
No, that's okay.
Well, I've got a couple questions. I'm sure that you address these in this wonderful book that like I said, I am going to get it and read it, because I'm not only a fan of Dr. Paul's, but I'm a fan of yours too. And that is, it seems to me that his opponent's main criticism of Dr. Paul, and I hear this myself when I tell people that I am a Ron Paul fan, they'll say one or two or perhaps both of these two criticisms. They'll say, well, there's just no way we can possibly go back onto the gold standard. And number 2, they'll say, well, I agree with him about all the economic stuff, but I really don't agree with his foreign policy. I think he'd be weak. He would weaken the U.S. defenses, something like that. I wonder if you could just counter those, or give people like me something to counter those arguments with.
Well, right now the NBA, the National Basketball Association, is having its semifinals. Oklahoma City against what's that place in Texas? I forget. And the Celtics against the Miami Heat. And if you listen to the basketball games or watch them on TV, when the opposing team has got the ball, what do the fans chant? They chant defense, defense, defense. Namely, they're trying to urge their team. It's San Antonio. I forgot. No insult to San Antonio. They're playing Oklahoma City. They yell defense. Namely, they can distinguish between defense and offense, as can Ron Paul. But the people who criticize Ron Paul can't distinguish between defense and offense. Look, we have the United States government, I shouldn't say we, they don't act in my behalf. The United States government has got 800 or so military bases in about 130 different countries.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Afghanistan, Iraq, Germany, Korea, everywhere. You can tell me that with a straight face that that's defense? No, that's offense. Ron Paul is in favor of a strong defense, and he thinks that this offense, paradoxically, or maybe not so paradoxically, undermines our defense. The way Ron Paul sees it, they're here because we were there first. He had this big fight with Giuliani on TV in 2007, where he said that the reason for 9/11 is they were ticked off at us because we were hurling missiles at them and drones and bombing them and killing them. And he said, suppose China or Brazil or the Martians had soldiers in the U.S., wouldn't we be ticked off at them, and wouldn't we want to fight them? So what he's trying to do is just bring a modicum of common sense to this debate. Ron Paul favors a strong defense. Think of a Coast Guard, a very, very strong Coast Guard. Namely, he wants to bring all the soldiers back. They shouldn't be on any foreign lands. We're violating the sovereignty of other countries by having soldiers there. Whether they've invited us there or not doesn't matter. And, of course, we should have submarines all over the place in case, God forbid, anyone attacks us. You know, we'll kick their butt. But there's a big distinction to be made between them attacking us and us kicking their butt, which is defense, or us anticipating. We don't have to wait until they do it, but if they show any evidence of hostility that they're going to take over our country or invade us, then we should nip that in the bud, and that's defense. But offense means, you know, we have soldiers all over the place, and any time two tribes or two clans get into a fight with each other, the United States is involved. Ron Paul harks back to the Founding Fathers who warned against entangling alliances and looking for dragons abroad to slay, and says we should have a strong defense but not any offense at all. Okay, that's one question. The other one is gold. Well, I don't see why it's so hard to get back on the gold standard. I mean, when the Fed started in 1913, if you look at the 100 years before then, when we were sort of on the gold, although not as fully as Ron Paul would like, we didn't have any inflation. We had hardly any depressions, recessions, unemployment, and the little bit that we had then was due to the imperfections of the gold standard and government interferences with it, which were slight. But if you look since 1913, the dollar, not backed by gold anymore, has lost, 97, 98% of its value from 1913. We've had horrendous inflations, depressions, unemployment. So Ron Paul wants to get rid of the Fed and have a 100% gold-backed dollar, in which case the dollar will be very solid, and it won't be causing the inflation, depression, and unemployment that it has. So I think on both of these issues, foreign policy and gold, Ron is 100% dead on, and his critics are entirely wrong.
Well, I believe that this is right. This is very much in tune with Ludwig von Mises' idea. I read one time, whether it's urban legend or not, but supposedly at one time Mises himself was asked if there were one reform that you could have, what would it be? And he immediately said, sound money, because sound money limits government. If we have sound money, then government can't wage war everywhere. It can't have a welfare state that is beyond sort of a minimum thing. It can't bail out banks and every business in the world, because the people then control the money instead of the government. And so it seems to me that... Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think Mises was entirely correct, and indeed Mises and Murray Rothbard are two of Ron Paul's gurus, mentors. I think that you're absolutely right in what you said, that it's very difficult to declare war unjustifiably unless you have the printing press, which the Fed has and which they wouldn't have under gold. because there are only three ways that government can get money. One is taxes, and people know exactly who's doing the taxing. They can't blame that on capitalism. The other is borrowing, and everyone knows who's doing the borrowing when government does the borrowing. The third one is creation of money. And Obama's blaming this on speculators or greedy people or God knows what. And this is nonsense, and this is a key to government's power. And you're quite right. It would be much more difficult for them to wage offensive war without the Fed. So perhaps, I don't know, if it was up to me and I could only do one thing, I would pull the soldiers home because they're just killing innocent people, and murder seems more of a violation of our rights than inflation and unemployment. But you're right that the two are not unconnected, and that if we pull the rug out of their war-like activities with monetary reform, we'll go a long way toward solving both problems.
I wonder if we could conclude our interview, Walter, with if you would care to tell our listeners what is Ron Paul is a libertarian, as are you and I. I'm assuming that you are. I consider myself a libertarian. And there is a difference between libertarianism and conservatism, but most people equate the two. I wonder if you would care to just give a thumbnail explanation of of why libertarianism is not the same as conservatism.
Well, I think that the political economy is sort of like a three-legged stool, and one leg is liberalism or leftism or progressivism or socialism or whatever these people are calling themselves nowadays. They keep changing. The other is conservatism or fascism, if you want to be blunt about it, and the third one is libertarianism. Now, on economics, the conservatives and the fascists are a little bit better than the socialists and the commies. Just a little bit better, not much better, but a little bit better. And, like take Mitt Romney, I don't know, his Romney care is the same as Obamacare as far as I'm concerned, but and he also favors the minimum wage law, but he's a little bit better on unions, and the conservatives are slightly better on economics. But they're worse on personal liberties and civil liberties. They're worse on the NDAA and the war on drugs, whereas the liberals are economics, but slightly better on personal liberties. Whereas libertarians are good on both. We favor freedom across the board, freedom in economics and freedom in personal liberties. And the mainstream media thinks that libertarians are inconsistent because they somehow think that if you favor somewhat freedom in economics but not in personal liberties, like the conservatives, then you're okay, and if you do the opposite like liberals, again you're okay, but if you favor freedom in both realms, well then you're logically inconsistent. Mm-hmm. Well, that's nonsense. It's the other two legs of this three-legged stool that are logically inconsistent, and only libertarians are consistent. Namely, we favor, and certainly I am a libertarian, we favor freedom in the economic sphere, in the economic realm, and also in the personal liberties realm. So I think that in some sense, libertarians are just as far away from conservatives as we are from left, liberal, progressives, just in different ways.
Yeah, I think that as you say that it's not really conservatism, libertarianism on the right, and liberalism on the left. It's really, in many ways, conservatism and what we now call the liberals, which they stole from us libertarians, that nice phrase. They're really, in many ways, two sides of the same coin. And libertarianism is, I think, what libertarianism really does hark back to the founding fathers, who, in my opinion, they were the greatest generation. Not to disparage the World War II generation, but the greatest generation in our nation were the founding fathers. Well,
I'm in favor of disparaging the greatest generation with World War II. I think that was an unjustified war. It was based on World War I. Had we not entered into World War I, there never would have been a World War II. On the other hand, the founding fathers had this minor slip called slavery, which we should never forget. And I'm joking when I say it's a minor slip, but in many other ways, the Washington and John Quincy Adams were very, very good on economics and foreign policy, but they did have that problem of slavery. Thanks
Well,
for having me on your show. I really appreciate being with you.
Well, Walter, thank you very much for agreeing to this interview, and good luck with your book. So, again, ladies and gentlemen, this is Patrick Barron, and I'm your guest host on Radio Free Market. Please visit us on the web at radiofreemarket.com, where you can subscribe for free to all of our shows on iTunes, or you can visit our Radio Free Market archives for easy download. So until next time, again, this is Patrick Barron. Wherever you are, please stand up for freedom. Thank you for listening. Okay, so they will edit that, and so now, even though it's being recorded, they'll just edit all this out. So I thought that went very well, Walter. I'm sorry I threw you that curveball at the very beginning.
No, au contraire.
I thought it worked out very well, though.
No, don't eliminate me saying I forgot what I wrote. I think it's charming, if I can say so myself. I mean, you can't remember everything you say, and,
No.
who remembers 7 different points? No, I wouldn't change that at all. I think that was one of the better parts of the interview.
I attended a Ron Paul, I wouldn't call it a rally. He gave just a talk in front of a very nice audience and a very appreciative audience in Iowa a few months ago. And one thing that Ron Paul said was that he will often go into and being told.
He'll often go into what? I didn't hear you.
There was a blip in my phone. I'm sure somebody's trying to call in. He'll often go into an interview and they'll say, "Well, this is what we're going to ask you," and Ron Paul will say, "Now, really, I don't want." He'll say, "Well, I don't want to discuss whatever it is." In this case, he said he did not want to discuss the other candidates, and he said, and of course he gets on the show and it's live and they're recording it and they ask him about the other candidates, and so this is another kind of curveball that interviewers tend to do, is promise you that they're not going to ask you something, or you say, well, something's off limits, to ask, but they'll ask it anyway. And
I guess right off the top of my head, I would say he could say right in front of the public broadcast that, look, before the interview, we discussed this, and I mentioned that I didn't want to discuss the other candidates, and you agreed not to ask me, so please withdraw your question and ask me something else.
Well, I saw someone actually do that. I was watching TV. I forget what it was, just a couple nights ago, and it was a show in which they had 3 people who were they were not in the same location, but they were all, in different locations. And so the interviewer asked the question of the first gentleman, and he said, well, that's not why you told me you wanted me on your show. However, I will do the best I can to answer that question. So right away it made the interviewer look bad, as if they had gotten this man on the show under false pretenses and were just trying to sort of, sabotage his points of view. So and I thought, well, he did a good job of defending himself, and that was a good answer.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Well, thank you again for the interview, and you're the one who got me to go to down to the Mises Scholars Conference.
Beautiful.
If you recall, you sent me a nice email after you read something I wrote, and suggested that I go. So, and I had a wonderful time. So I intend to go every year if I can. Okay.
That'll be great.
All right.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Walter.
Thanks again for having me.
Okay.